When I was asked, I knew a couple of weeks back the passage I wanted to explore briefly with us today, because it's a passage that I know I've come back to on a number of occasions, more than a number of occasions in recent months. It's a passage, though, that in light of recent global events has taken a very fresh perspective for me in the past few days. We're going to look at Psalm 13. And I've asked Stan if he would read it for us. If you have a Bible with you, you may want to follow it through. But if not, just allow Stan's voice to capture what David is experiencing here. Stan, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me.
Thank you. We don't know what's been going on for David, but you can hear the desperation in his complaints. Things are feeling bleak. He feels alone in his anxiety and his sorrow. Without the sense of Yahweh's presence, David is feeling at the end of himself. He's feeling at the end of his resources. He's feeling at the end of his capacity. It feels, and it clearly is, a really tough and desperate place. It's a tough, relentless turmoil of thoughts that taunt and haunt him. He feels that Yahweh has forgotten him, and forgotten him for a long, long time. And without sensing God's presence, David accuses him of hiding his face from him. The second line of verse 2, how long will my enemy triumph over me, must be being prayed in Ukraine by brothers and sisters right now. How long will my enemy triumph? For David, this may well have been a very real enemy who feels close to defeating him. For us, our enemy is much more likely to be metaphorical, but an enemy nonetheless, an enemy that still feels to have power, that taunts and brings pain. Maybe a health issue, maybe a recurring temptation, maybe a relational challenge that we live with the constant pain of, maybe my singleness, maybe my childlessness, maybe a distant child, maybe my insert your own story. How long will my enemy triumph over me? And then in verse 3, David knows the importance of light. Look on me and answer, Lord my God, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And one of the songs that Sarah led us in, kind of, it was almost word for word, but certainly sentiment completely tied up with that. That light being an integral theme throughout the overarching story of God, that it brings life and moves us out of shadow, moves us out of death. And that light and life is seen in eyes. We can see it in each other's eyes. And David knows he needs to see it, wants to see it, longs to see it in God's eyes. And he seems to contrast not seeing God's face with darkness, and seeing God's face with the light that he knows he will experience, and that life, that light that brings life, that brings hope when he looks at him full in the face. Any of the Psalms is always so difficult to know the tone with which David, or whichever the author was that wrote that Psalm. Stan, you've surprised me how you've read that. How you read it was just fantastic, because I know I've read this Psalm, and I know so many others will read it. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And the almost the sense of genteelness in my longing. But I wonder whether I wonder whether David had written it with a, how long, Lord, will you forget me? How long will you hide your face from me? With a real sense of shout and desperation and frustration. It's just so difficult to know, but I'm just so grateful that we have been given language to be able to address God, and whatever tone we find ourselves needing to use, that God is large enough, gracious enough, beautiful enough to be able to accept that tone. And I know the reason I've come back to this passage time and time again is just because some of our own journey, Beck and my own journey, is where we feel we have been continually coming around a certain issue for us with regards to a family member, and just kind of sort of, how long, God? How long? It's part of my story, and it's no doubt part of your story for your own reasons. And it can feel tough. It can feel relentless, and it certainly is painful. And yet, David, in his pain, in his uncertainty, and in his feeling that God's face is hidden far from him, in his fear that his enemies will triumph over him, and despite his deep, deep unanswered questions, in verse 5, writes, "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation, and I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." And so can I. So do I trust in Yahweh's unfailing love. There are times that it's easier, aren't there? There are times that it becomes more challenging. Can I raise my hands? Can I put my trust once more where I don't see what I want to see, where it feels as though my enemy is pressing me down? Do I rejoice in his salvation and sing of his goodness? And yet, as I mentioned at the start of this, as we consider Ukraine, as we consider the invasion by Russia, and on this global day of prayer, how are these words being read and prayed by brothers and sisters who have fled for miles upon miles upon miles? I know of Scripture Union colleagues who have driven 14 hours west in Ukraine to escape because they're living in high rises. We all have known, we'll all have heard our own stories of those. How are they praying these words now? Or in Russia, our brothers and sisters who are experiencing very different real pain of the international sanctions that are being imposed on them. How are they praying this? How are they sensing this with what their nation is doing? And it would be great to be able to pray from here for that country, for that nation, for our brothers and sisters, for those that don't know Jesus, but for peace in that region. Rupert, can I hand back to you to facilitate how we now do that?